When we think of fighting games involving weapons, there's quite a few that you'd probably think of straight away. Easily the most recognizable would be the Soul Calibur series, right? You've got a bunch of cool characters where the weapon they use is core to their gameplay, and even in-game personality. There's other games out there too. Back in the older days, you'd have games like Battle Arena Toshinden, Samurai Showdown, and even more obscure games like Dark Rift or Bushido Blade. My point is that the idea of a weapon fighter is a real thing, and it's been around for years. What always interested me as a Mortal Kombat fan is that combatants using weapons in this game has been around since almost the very beginning, and over the years evolved and became a lot more prominent. Even now, with our latest game in MK11, characters use weapons all the time, yet we've never really considered Mortal Kombat a weapon fighter, because it isn't. However, weapons have changed so much over the years, and it's clearly been a clear focus to give weapons to our favourite characters, but not to change their core gameplay just because of it. Weapons and Mortal Kombat have gone hand in hand for years, and today's video breaks down that evolution from game to game. I guess we should start with the classic, shouldn't we? Most prominently, Mortal Kombat 2, as that was the game that really kicked off linking characters with weapons. You'd have characters like Baraka with the arm blades or Kung Lao with the razor-sharp hat, but honestly, the key examples here would definitely belong to Kitana and Mileena. Jade as well, later in Ultimate MK3, but this was where the weapons would be seen a lot more prominently in special moves, win animations, and, of course, finishing moves. Now, it wouldn't really expand too much in these classic games, you only had limited memory, and it was a nice way to keep that palette swap character idea to save space, but also have these weapons on hand to further distinguish characters from each other, besides just a colour change on their clothing. This didn't really change much in Ultimate MK3. Jade, Mileena, and Kitana keep their weapons and special moves and combo strings, but it didn't add anything new, certainly not with gameplay. And during this time, we would see an element of experimentation with character weapons. I think most prominently, Scorpion is seen for a few frames of his punch combos to be wielding an axe, but we wouldn't see this random axe again after Ultimate MK3, except for cooking with Scorpion. May it rest in peace. Weapons were a lot more in your face in the final arcade installment, Mortal Kombat 4. Every character had a weapon in this game, and it was something that you had to input to pull out. It gave you some new attacks, but it was fairly standard in terms of function. You had slashes, pokes, sweeps maybe, but nothing that would necessarily push forward the character's identity, as those weapons were incredibly simple. Visually, they didn't stand out much, and in some cases it looked a bit like these weapons could have been given to any character at random, and it would have made the same amount of sense. But the big thing MK4 and MK Gold did was that these weapons would make an impact to the actual gameplay. Characters could perform a dialer combo into weapon equip, and you'd get a proper combo string from it. Some characters were incredibly powerful with weapon, and some notable examples would be Reptile's Axe Infinite or Jarrek's Machete Option Select. It was something that made a character better and more interesting mechanically. On the opposite end of this though, we would once again see the experimental side of weapon choice, where we'd once again never see certain weapons belonging to certain characters. Sub-Zero had one of the more famous weapons in this game, as he had this kind of ice scepter. It was mechanically one of the better weapons in the game actually, but this was the first and last time Sub would be seen with such a weapon anyway. In promotional videos that were made to really big up Mortal Kombat 4, members of the team could be seen saying that the weapon inclusion was some of their favourite new elements of the game, something that, in my opinion, would almost be a taste of things to come, because weapons and Mortal Kombat were really only just getting started. Now, for the 3D MK titles, I'm just going to put them all in our next section, as mechanically, they didn't change in terms of function. There were some small differences from mainly Deadly Alliance to Armageddon. In Deadly Alliance, for example, the reversal attack that a few characters had wouldn't work against a weapon. But in Armageddon, 2 games later, the universal parry mechanic would work against pretty much everything, including weapon attacks. But that's kind of it really. This was where weapons took the largest role up to this point. because for every character that was playable here, you had a hand-to-hand style and a weapon style. Deadly Alliance and Deception had 2 hand-to-hands and a weapon, and Armageddon had 1 hand-to-hand and a weapon because of the increased roster size. But the weapons would really stand out for a lot of the cast, and in a lot of cases would begin the link between weapon and fighter in terms of character personality. And by that, let me show you what I mean real quick. Scorpion would now use a sword exclusively. This sword changed from Deadly Alliance to be more of a one-handed blade in Deception and Armageddon, and would be seen a lot more in future games. Sub-Zero would finally have a weapon settled for him to be a blade made of ice, something once again we'd see later. This took so many forms for so many characters to be developed in later games, and became more iconic in those games. Tanya, Liu Kang, even Sindel for instance, would all see the weapons they used here develop later to be part of their core game plan. We certainly didn't know it at the time, but there was a lot being set here that would be more explored over a decade later and beyond. It was cool as hell being able to swap between a weapon and a hand-to-hand stance, even if some weapons didn't really fit the characters. But once again, this idea changed just a little bit with the next major installment, after MK vs DC came out and the well-documented midway crash and creation of NetherRealm Studios into Mortal Kombat 9. And this game was where what we now know as weapons in MK would start to show the early stages. Right, Mortal Kombat 9 was a reinvention of the game. It wasn't 3D anymore, no more multiple fighting styles and stuff, just a character with their own set of standalone moves, just like the older days. However, this game in particular was kind of where weapons would be subtly included without us really noticing them being present. As weird as that sounds. This style of weapon integration would be used in every MK title from that point onward, and let's talk about what that integration actually is here. Characters have their 4 attack buttons which would give access to standalone normals and combo strings. However, for some of these attacks, a weapon would be used in the attack itself, but because it's so subtle, it's not really something that we think about. But there's a few instances of this in the game that really do push forward the character as we now know them. Scorpion has a few strings that involve his swords, something that we saw start off many games prior, but one of his key normals is the overhead back 2, which is a move that uses both of his swords. Scorpion gameplay-wise may not necessarily feel all that different, even with these sword attacks, but the inclusion of them adds to Scorpion's character. Because I mean, like, in intros, outros, finishing moves and the like, we see them all the time, so why not subtly in gameplay as well? You could easily accomplish the same attacks without the swords. Scorpion could use various punches and kicks for those strings, and the overhead back 2 could have been something else as well, but having them this way does kind of make Scorpion feel more like Scorpion. This game extended Sub-Zero's ice blades in a similar fashion, creating weapons from ice for some of his attacks. Like, it doesn't really stand out all that much, but the beginnings are here. Stuff that, especially with Sub-Zero, we'd see explored in way more detail for the next 2 installments. My point for MK9 specifically is that the old days of having a weapon be this immediate right-in-your-face mechanic was a thing of the past now. MK4 having you manually equip one, 3D MK in the weapon stances, MK9 took the approach of giving characters weapons but in a way less obvious method. This would once again expand in the next game, which is Mortal Kombat X. When it comes to weapons in MK, I just said that it was extremely subtle, because in MK9 it definitely was, but now with Mortal Kombat X and the variation system, this took the weapon theme and actually made it more apparent, because characters could now have a variation that was entirely focused on a weapon that they were either given here for the first time, or a weapon they had in previous games that's evolved in this one to do more than it ever did previously. With this game, I want to go into some more character-specific examples because there's a lot more direct comparisons that we can make, and how these weapons do more than in Mortal Kombat 9 because it's no longer just moves that could have been accomplished without them. Here, weapons will change your character's gameplay significantly. Kobajitsu Tanya is the first example that I think of because this weapon was one of the more memorable in Deception and Armageddon. The variation with this weapon makes Tanya a close-range machine. But opposite to that, she has a second variation involving a naginata, which in promotional material for Deception was the weapon that she used in development. I simply assumed this weapon was kinda left on the drawing board for that game as she ended up with Kobajitsu instead. But this weapon gave Tanya more range on some of her normals, again changing how the character is played. The weapon is the reason why this is the case. Shinnok is definitely another character to focus on, because outside of Hellsparks, he's not the biggest ranged character in the game. However, the Bone Shaper variation gives him a scythe-like weapon that is a developed version of the spear he once had in MK4. He had a staff in Armageddon, so this variation kind of puts the two together to create something new. Again, giving some extra combo potential and a bit more range than a variation like Imposter, which was mostly focused on a Vortex-like mix-up. Scorpion and Sub-Zero would see further development to their weapons here, Scorpion's ninjutsu variation being his greatest ranged one, but many Scorpion players back in the day saw this as more of a neutral dominating variation due to its whiff punish potential. Sub-Zero would gain a Cryomancer variation, where it's no longer just a sword that's created using his powers. Now you have daggers, a warhammer, it's developed once again, just like the other games, one after another. Now with MKX, there's a lot more characters I could mention here where weapons can give them different styles of play. Kenshi with Kenjutsu, Kitana with, well, pretty much all three of hers, Piercing Melina, War God Kotal Khan, Takeda, Erron Black. There's so many weapon users in this game, but it is the variation system that makes these weapons a main focus point of the character. I always saw the variations in this game kind of being like this evolved version of the multiple fighting styles from the 3D games many years before it. Okay, this is the final game on our list, and in my opinion, it took a lot of what MK9 and MKX started and put them together into a basic move list. MK11 was more known for having custom variations this time over, which in my opinion was kind of more like a loadout system, taking bits and pieces to construct the game plan you wanted. This actually meant that the weapon a character had was mostly built a lot more into their core gameplay, of which we saw characters utilizing weapons in a modern game more than ever before. And let's go over just how many characters have weapons this time round. Scorpion with the chain spear and sword attacks. Sub-Zero with the many ice weapons that were either built into his kit or extra moves that you could take. Watch your head because the overhead axe forward 2 is something you see multiple times a match. Jade and her staff in combo strings, normals, and her infamously powerful uppercut. Kitana's fans, not only acting as projectiles, but are seen in many of her basic attacks as well. Melina's psi attacks are present for sure, but mostly in projectiles. The weapons she's been given here for her regular attacks are the claws that can be seen on her gauntlets or gloves. Frost creates ice blades, granting her the gameplay of longer range, but slightly slower buttons because of it. Nightwolf's tomahawks take center stage this time, but he also has knives and his classic bow. Shao Kahn uses his hammer more here than ever before. It used to be mostly special moves really, but here it's once again a part of many attacks. But not only the hammer, his spear as well, something that started in classic Mortal Kombat. Now the special forces are a bit different because their weapons will obviously belong to more modern weapons. But even then, the idea of a weapon being used beyond just striking with your arms and legs is still apparent. Cassie using her pistols and her drone, Sonya having a drone as well, Jax with his grenade launcher, and Jackie with her gauntlets and leg device. I mean, they're all here. Noob Saibot has a sickle, somewhat of a development from his scythe weapon in Mortal Kombat 4, and gold. Baraka's arm blades are more built into his gameplay than we'd ever seen in 20 years, on top of the flag specials given to him, adding the flag to his weapon list. Raiden's staff is a huge part of him. Specials, cinematic animations, and even combo strings. We didn't see this at all in MK9 or X-Raiden. Kano's knives act in a similar fashion to the other characters. He uses these knives all over the place. Cabal's hook swords take absolute center stage for so many of his important attacks. Almost everything he has uses them. Liu Kang's nunchucks develop into his base move list. Again, specials and other attacks. Kung Lao has arguably more ways to use his hat here than in any of the other games, which is saying a lot, as MKX developed this idea in many ways. Scarlet is no longer a character built around just the daggers that she had in MK9. In this game, the blood weapons take a new form, mostly with the scythe, of course, but she creates other weapons from them too. Erron Black, like MKX, is seen with all kinds of gadgets, but it's the revolver that stands out once again for his specials and strings. Kotal Khan has more weapons than just sword and disc this time. However, the sword is the most apparent feature in this big guy's design. Shiva was never really a character known for a weapon, but when she made her MK11 debut, she uses a spiked shield. Surprisingly fitting to her, I have to say. Collector having all kinds of weapons to keep in theme with his character. I'm not even going to try and list them all because he uses weapons that he's gathered, and there's a lot of them. Sindel's Guan Dao returns from Deception, something that she didn't have in MK9, but something that she uses often in this game to extend the range of certain buttons, on top of her cinematic moments too. Fujin has a sword, which is obviously much smaller than the giant one he had in Armageddon, but the crossbow returns from MK4. Both of these weapons play a huge part in his gameplay. And finally here, Rain gets given a brand new weapon that I don't think any of us expected. A guitar of all things. Something again we see in most of his punch attacks. They clearly wanted this to be a big part of the character, and in MK11 it definitely is. Now, there's an argument to be made even further with the likes of Geras and his gauntlet, or Devourer with the bug attacks, which I don't really want to count because Devourer is based around this idea of a hive, isn't she? But my point is, disregarding guest characters, which adds even more weapons to the roster, there's a total of 27 characters here that are seen using weapons in their attacks. Now, it's clear that weapons have had many forms in the 30 years of Mortal Kombat that we've had, but I just find it super interesting how across almost every single game, they've been here, even if we weren't really thinking about it, to the point where in our latest game as a community, the vast majority of the roster are seen using them in their own way. It kind of dawned on me just how much of a core feature characters wielding this kind of stuff has become, and I don't know if it's just me, but it doesn't really get talked about amongst fans. So this video was my way of exploring all of the games in the timeline, looking at how prominent they were in each title, and kind of putting the building blocks together that led to where we are now with Mortal Kombat 11. I mean, where do weapons go from here? If there's ever going to be a new game, which I always hope there will be, how much of these weapons will take center stage? Will we one day go into the Soul Calibur territory and end up with a fully fledged weapon fighter on our hands? Who knows? But either way, I really want to thank all of you for sticking around, especially if you stayed until the end. As always, feel free to comment and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and stick around for more content to come. Take care everyone, see you later!